Imagine being confined for months inside a metal tube, surrounded by cold, dark water hundreds of meters deep. The air is dense, the smell is of diesel oil, sweat, and metal. There are no windows, there is no privacy, and every sound can mean life or death. This was the daily reality of the sailors who served aboard the feared German U-boats during World War II. These submarines were not just weapons of war, they were mobile prisons, laboratories of human survival under extreme pressure. In this video, you will dive into the depths, literally, of everyday life on a U-boat. We will explore the routine, the sacrifices, the risks, and the small victories that kept these men alive and operating in the most hostile theater of war of the 20th century, the ocean floor. The U-boats were built to hunt, not to comfort. Unlike large battleships or destroyers, submarines had a single purpose: attack and disappear. That meant crew comfort was a non-existent luxury. A standard patrol could last from 3 weeks up to 6 months. During that time, the men on board could not bathe, could not change clothes regularly, and lived immersed in a stifling, humid environment saturated with oil. Imagine wearing the same clothes for 180 days, sleeping in a bunk bed shared with other sweating men, eating moldy food, dealing with constant seasickness, and staying alert 24 hours a day. This was how U-boat crew members lived. A U-boat's crew consisted of about 40 to 50 men, divided among specialists, such as radio operators, mechanics, and torpedo men, and sailors with general duties. Each had a specific role and routine. The day was divided into strict shifts. Ordinary sailors followed a cycle of 3 8-hour shifts, one for sleeping, one for regular work, and one for extra tasks. Specialists, such as radio operators, worked 3 4-hour shifts between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., followed by 2 6-hour shifts during the night. The work was relentless. Even when not in combat, there were machines to maintain, reports to write, torpedoes to calibrate, cables to check. The constant noise of diesel engines, the sound of valves, and sonar alerts filled every inch of the submarine. If working inside the U-boat was already hard, being in the conning tower on the open sea was worse. During watch shifts, sailors were exposed to the cutting wind of the North Atlantic, constantly swept by freezing waves. To make it worse, there was no way to dry wet clothes. Often, uniforms stayed soaked for days. Even so, duty called them. During storms, lookouts were tied with safety ropes to avoid being swept overboard. But that did little to ease the cold that sliced through their skin like blades. Can you imagine being stuck in a wet coat, under freezing rain, while trying to spot an enemy on the dark horizon for hours on end? That was U-boat watch duty. The top priority on U-boats was the mission, not the crew's comfort. That meant drinking water was rationed, especially when one of the tanks was filled with diesel to extend the submarine's operational range. Baths? Forbidden. Shaving? Impossible. Clean clothes? Only dreams. Hygiene was minimal. Each sailor was allowed 1 change of underwear and socks, and that was it. A special saltwater soap was provided to clean the body, but it left a greasy, uncomfortable film on the skin, so it was rarely used. Instead of baths, deodorant was the only ally against the growing body odor. The submarine's internal conditions were so harsh that the spread of mold on food and clothing was common. Added to the smell of diesel, grease, and humidity, it created an almost unbreathable environment. Space was a precious resource. Each sailor was allowed a single small locker, and the rest of the submarine was filled with engines, torpedoes, and cables. At the start of missions, even beds were temporarily removed to store extra torpedoes. Hot bunking was standard practice. While one sailor slept, another worked, and the two shared the same bunk in shifts. There was no privacy. The bunks were side by side in narrow corridors where everyone passed. The only exception was the captain, who had a space separated by a curtain. But even then, it was just a small corner near the control room, where he could hear everything happening. At the start of a patrol, the sailors were stocked with the best food available: fresh meat, bread, fruits, vegetables. But over time, Humidity and excessive heat spoiled the provisions quickly. The U-boat's refrigerator was far too small, and soon the bread began to grow mold, nicknamed rabbits by the crew because of the white, fuzzy appearance. After that, the menu boiled down to canned goods and a soy paste called Brotling's Bolver, a meat substitute supplied by the army. The crew called it diesel food because of the flavor soaked up from the submarine's air. To make matters worse, one of the toilets was used as a food storage area during the first days, leaving only one for the entire crew. With more than 40 men aboard, unpleasant situations were inevitable. Using the bathroom on a U-boat was a true challenge. The flushing was manual, done with a pump that dumped waste directly into the sea. However, during moments of absolute silence, such as when the submarine was tracking an enemy ship, using the toilet was forbidden, as the noise of flushing could be detected by enemy sonar. More than 40 men sharing a single toilet for days, sometimes unable to use it for hours. It was a ticking time bomb of discomfort. But perhaps the greatest enemy inside a U-boat was mental isolation. Spending weeks or months at sea without seeing land, trees, or new faces affected the sanity of many. The only distractions were a record player on board, a few decks of cards, and improvised games. Some commanders, like the famous Kalu Wolfgang Luth, organized singing and lying competitions to keep morale high during long patrols, one of which lasted more than 6 months. Imagine living with the constant fear of death, with the claustrophobia of metal walls around you, and without any contact with the outside world. The human mind can endure a lot, but everything has a limit. Living aboard a U-boat meant constantly existing between two extremes, the exhausting monotony of waiting and the absolute terror of combat. Silence that lasted for weeks was suddenly broken by a radar signal, a sonar reading, or the echo of a distant ship. The routine changed instantly. In seconds, every man knew what to do. The lights went out. Absolute silence took over the submarine. The engine was shut down, and the hunter became invisible, sliding through the dark like a metallic ghost. The captain's orders were short and sharp. Crewmen rushed to their posts. Torpedoes were armed, eyes fixed on instruments, and trained ears tried to catch every propeller sound, every enemy pattern. And then, the launch. The torpedoes left the hull with a dry crack, followed by an even tenser silence. The wait for the explosion. Sometimes it came, other times it didn't, and when it didn't, the enemy responded. If attacking was risky, being detected was a nightmare. Once located by an enemy ship, the U-boat became a literal depth target. Depth charges were dropped in sequence, exploding at different depths. These blasts caused brutal tremors. The submarine's steel hull creaked like wood being twisted. Lights flickered, equipment shook. Sailors clung to whatever they could, trying not to panic. Beyond enemy ships, U-boats faced another lethal foe, patrol aircraft. Equipped with radar and anti-submarine bombs, they were the downfall of many submarines, especially during the passage along the coast of Great Britain or the North Atlantic. Even submerged, U-boats were not safe, and if forced to surface, to breathe or recharge batteries, they became easy targets for air attacks. The Allies' superiority in radar technology and air coverage made submarine life increasingly short as the war advanced. In the early years of the war, U-boats were the predators, but after 1943, they became the prey. When a U-boat was struck, the chances of survival were minimal. Very few sailors escaped from sunken submarines. Water pressure at great depths prevented hatches from being opened, and even if they managed to reach the surface, the ocean's cold killed within minutes. Therefore, the fight for survival took place inside the hull. If a compartment flooded, doors were sealed, even with men inside. This was the brutal reality of submarine warfare, saving as many lives as possible, even if it meant sacrificing some. Constant tension, fear of death, isolation, and claustrophobia took a heavy toll. Many crew members developed severe stress symptoms, insomnia, paranoia, nervous breakdowns. In some situations, men panicked during attacks, refusing to follow orders or screaming uncontrollably. It was rare, but not impossible. Some U-boats carried a doctor on board, but most of the time the only therapy was military discipline and the solidarity among the men. Short pause. Chapter 14. The Return. If there was one when the patrol ended, and if the U-boat was still intact, the crew returned home. Arrival was marked by an emblematic scene. Thin, bearded men with sunken eyes and uniforms stained with oil and mold. The stench clinging to their bodies was unmistakable. Yet for base officers, that smell was a symbol of bravery. The sailors were welcomed with ceremony and respect, for they knew they were lucky to be alive. Many of their comrades never returned. The mortality rate in U-boats was one of the highest of the entire war. About 75% of German submariners died in service. Despite the ruthless war tactics adopted by Nazi Germany, there is something undeniably human in the stories of the submariners. Young men, confined, fighting against immense forces, the sea, the enemy, time, and their own minds. Many of them were between 18 and 22 years old. They entered the war with promises of glory, but faced the frozen hell of the depths. Some never sank a single ship. Others watched helplessly as their own torpedoes caused destruction. In the end, life on a U-boat was not about epic victories or cinematic heroism. It was about endurance, about enduring, about returning, if possible. Today, some U-boats remain at the bottom of the ocean as silent tombs. Others have been turned into museums. Entering one is to relive a part of history that few people truly know, and even fewer have experienced. Every bolt, every narrow corridor, every panel with worn buttons holds the memories of young men who sweated, cried, and died there. A crew member of the U-505 wrote in April 1944, "The age of the boat is making itself felt. The door of one of the torpedo tubes doesn't close properly. The tropical heat is unbearable. Inside the boat it's between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius, and we sleep drenched in sweat. Sometimes I wanted to tear off my skin." Another commander aboard U-39 wrote in his diary, around 1914, "Still in the same place, sailing for 48 hours. I felt the need to turn to my pen and notebook for relief and joy amid the discomfort of life here. Upon unexpectedly hearing a beloved voice on the telephone, he overflowed. It was Zoe. My voice was trembling with excitement. My blood was rushing through my veins. I'm usually calm, but I was shaking." A young sailor, Eberhard Herzsch, 21 years old, wrote from Wilhelmshaven in December 1943, shortly before setting sail. The message, later shared online, said, "My dear Babette, Christmas is coming. We set up a small tree and placed candles. It feels like Christmas here. I write by candlelight perhaps on the last Saturday on land. May the new year bring the peace we so long for soon after." U-772 was sunk in 1944, with all 48 crew members losing their lives. The captain of U-701, imprisoned in 1942, wrote to Admiral Donitz, "It is extraordinarily depressing to be a prisoner while our comrades continue the mission. But I am grateful that life has still been spared. Even after we fought so hard in these hot, oily, salty waters." Kapitan Lieutenant Peter Czech, commander of U-505, committed suicide during a deep depth charge attack, stressed and trapped under extreme mental pressure. While enduring the bombardment with depth charges, Czech apparently suffered a severe mental collapse and committed suicide, shooting himself in the head with a Walther PPK pistol in his control room, in full view of his shocked crew. Short pause 2. A sailor from U-76 described the terror of the attack and the cold after surfacing. 3 depth charges. The submarine shook completely. 10 minutes later, a storm of depth charges. Then came the order, "Abandon ship." I was immediately taken below. Everyone here is very friendly. Afterwards, I had to hand over my personal belongings. They gave me something to eat. He went from the submerged hell to unexpected relief from the enemy. A glimpse of humanity amid combat. Matrosengefreiter. Franz Machon was the sole survivor of U-512. He recounts the desperation and isolation. He escaped the sinking vessel and swam for 1.5 hours to the surface. He survived 10 days in a fragile raft, cutting seabirds to feed himself. He and a petty officer opened the torpedo loading hatch. After leaving the submarine, his crewmate became disoriented. Machon swam for about 1.5 hours. The raft provided his only shelter for the next 10 days. Attacked by seabirds, he decided to eat them. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, operator and non-commissioned officer, described humor and camaraderie as shields against stress. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, senior, telegrapher, an account that encompasses emotions, immense courage, companionship, fleeting moments of triumph, humor, without which resistance to stress would be virtually impossible. Accounts like his show that, despite the danger, the spirit of collective survival remained strong. In conversations after the capture of U-701, sailors described the despair and compassion. Everything was dark in the central station. I asked them to open the hatch, gasped for air. I looked around. I didn't feel much. I reached the tower. He was hit and fell. The mortality rate and its link to fear in interviews with Allied veterans. Near the end of the war, only 1 submarine out of 10 returned home. Most had no idea that radar was detecting them. Everyone thought it would be the other 9 submarines that would be sunk. Young guys, 19 years old, always thought it would be someone else. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.